A very good afternoon. I'm Avnindra Som and you're listening to the news in detail on Gold FM.
The news headlines on Gold FM.
MP Dr. Archana Ramanathan arrested. Middle East crisis has little to do with low tea exports.
What can you expect from an old tea bush? Some are over 50 years old, some are 80, 100 years old. What can you expect from an old tea bush? Some are over 50 years old, some are 80, 100 years old.
Treasury fraud probe stalls as lawyers demand answers. Opposition files bribery complaint over diesel imports. Drug bust involving monks exposes wider smuggling ring. Netanyahu's corruption trial testimony cancelled hours before hearing.
The top story on Gold FM.
Sri Lanka's iconic tea industry is facing a storm. While conflict in the Middle East has severed vital global shipping routes, experts warn that the real threat to the world-renowned Ceylon tea comes from within, a crisis of both geopolitics and aging agriculture. For an island nation heavily dependent on agricultural exports, the numbers from earlier this year are alarming. By the end of March, Sri Lanka recorded a tea export deficit of nearly 2.8 million kilos compared to last year. With maritime shipping routes becoming volatile following the outbreak of a war in late February, exporters found their cargo suddenly stranded. Niraj Dimel, chairman of the Sri Lankan Tea Board, explains the immediate paralysis.
The way they were hammering all over the countryside, including hammering Dubai and Bahrain and Kuwait and so on. So that put a lot of fear into the shipping line. But they were not taking cargo. They were requesting Sri Lankan tea exporters to hold back shipment. Whatever that was already on sea were being offloaded in ports in India and so on, because they didn't want to take the cargo and go into troubled water. So all in all, it is the drop is totally because of the impact from the war which broke out on the 28th of February. That is why we find that we were on a positive till into February, and March alone severe drop, and that has resulted in a quarter drop of, for the first 3 months we have dropped out by something like 2.8 million kilos. We have done little over 6 million kilos, whereas last year we did 63 million kilos plus the first 3 months of 2025. So purely because of the March drop, which as you said was about 15-16%, has affected the export performance.
While unofficial border channels offer a temporary lifeline, blaming the Middle East conflict masks a far deeper systematic decay within Sri Lanka's own tea estates. The island's share of global tea production has plummeted from nearly 20% a few decades ago to just 3.5% today. The reason, it turns out, is literally rooted in the ground.
Today, for the last 3 or 4 years, Sri Lanka has been producing less than 300 million kilos of tea. So we are a 3.5% shareholder of the global tea production. Compared to, say, 40 years ago, we would have had about 18-19% of the global tea in terms of production. So we have lost out big time. We crossed the 300 million kilos annual production in the year 2000, and we maintained it till about year 2015. And since then, there's been a downhill. Our bushes are old, right? We are not doing appreciable amount of replanting. Right? So what more can you expect from an old tea bush, which is some are over 50 years old, some are even over 80, 100 years old.
Dimel went on to say that with heavy rains approaching in May, crop yields are expected to rise, but without upgraded warehouse facilities and streamlined export laws, the tea risks going nowhere. From Ceylon tea to reclaim its crown, the industry must fundamentally modernize before time runs out. We will bring you more from our conversation with the chairman of the Tea Board at our evening primetime bulletin at 6:30.
This is the local news on Gold FM.
Ilavela police arrested Member of Parliament Dr. Ramanathan Archana following allegations of criminal intimidation. Acting police spokesperson Superintendent of Police Minura Senarath states the arrest follows a complaint that the MP threatened a woman with a firearm during a land dispute. Officers took the MP into custody when he arrived at the station this morning after being summoned for questioning. Dr. Ramanathan Archana will be produced before the Malakam Magistrates Court this afternoon. In a related development, police arrested the woman involved in the dispute yesterday for allegedly throwing a stone at the MP. She remains in remand custody until the day after tomorrow following her appearance before the Malakam Magistrate. Police revealed that the individual suspected of orchestrating a massive drug smuggling operation involving 22 monks previously coordinated at least 2 other successful shipments into the country. The suspect arrested in Meghavatta Gampaha allegedly received 80,000 rupees per trip to organize the logistics, with previous consignments traced to a safe house in Atharugiriya. Investigations by the Police Narcotics Bureau have further identified that 3 of the monks currently in custody were also participants in those prior smuggling runs. This follows up investigations after authorities seized a haul of kush and hashish valued at over 1.1 billion rupees at the Bandaranaike International Airport on the night of the 24th. The suspects were produced before the court yesterday and were ordered to remain in custody under a detention order for further interrogation until the 2nd of May. The Free Lawyers Organization raised serious concerns regarding the lack of legal action following a cyber attack on the General Treasury that diverted $2.5 million to hackers. Despite 5 days passing since the breach was exposed, the group claims investigators have yet to report the matter to court or record statements from suspended officials. In a formal letter containing 22 questions addressed to the President Anura Kumara Dissanayake and his cabinet, the organisation is demanding transparency on when the President was briefed by the Treasury Secretary and why Parliament and the public were not immediately informed. The organisation further questioned whether the President, in his capacity as Finance Minister, was aware of the initial cyber attack on the ministry's data system around September 6th last year. They're calling for the removal of the Treasury Secretary Dr. Harshana Surya Peruma to facilitate an impartial inquiry, while challenging the President to accept responsibility for what they describe as a critical failure in national security. Speaking to the media, Free Lawyers convener President's Counsel Maitri Gunaratne emphasised that the failure to involve emergency cybercrime units constitutes a grave oversight by the administration. Now, in the meantime, the joint opposition has formally lodged a complaint with the Commission to investigate allegations of bribery or corruption, calling for a probe into alleged financial misconduct within the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation regarding diesel imports. A delegation including former Minister Professor G.L. Piris, Patli Champikaranavak and Mahinda Amaravira alongside former MPs Lasantha Alagiyavanna and Asanga Navaratna submitted the signed petition this morning. Speaking to the press outside the Commission, New People's Front leader Sugeshwara Bandara and former MPs Premnath Sidolavatta and Ajit Mana Peruma emphasised the need for transparency in the energy sector, alleging that procurement discrepancies have caused significant losses to the state. Sri Lanka's economy showed signs of recovery in 2025, but a closer look at the country's finances reveals a picture of persistent strain, mounting debt and damage that will take years to repair. Central bank data shows that the Ceylon Electricity Board lost 38.7 billion rupees last year. The losses began in January when electricity tariffs were cut by 20% as the board burnt expensive thermal fuel during the dry season. A 15% tariff hike in June came too late to undo the damage. By the year's end, the CEB's short-term borrowings had climbed to over 206 billion rupees, up from 174 billion rupees the year before. Long-term liabilities stood at more than 411 billion rupees. And a further tariff increase of 10.3% has since been implemented, but the board's financial recovery remains fragile. Sri Lanka's national carrier, Sri Lankan Airlines, has also continued to be a burden on public finances. Years of accumulated debt forced the government to restructure $175 million worth of guaranteed bonds as recently as March this year. Meanwhile, the airline's freight volumes fell by nearly 14% in 2025, a sign that its operational troubles are far from over. The country's trade position also worsened. The merchandise trade deficit widened to $7.9 billion, up from $6.1 billion in 2024, as import spending fueled by pent-up demand for motor vehicles surged ahead of export growth. As for government finances, the overall budget deficit narrowed to 2.3% of GDP. But total central government debt rose to 30 trillion rupees from 28.7 trillion rupees in 2024. Foreign debt rose to 11.3 trillion rupees from 10.4 trillion rupees in 2024, partly due to currency depreciation. Interest payments alone consumed nearly half of all recurrent government spending at 2,500 billion for the year. Looking ahead, officials have warned of a potential revenue shortfall as the surge in vehicle import taxes that propped up 2025 revenue figures is unlikely to be repeated. Commuters across Sri Lanka faced severe travel disruptions this morning as railway drivers began a work to rule action, refusing to operate locomotives with technical defects. The protest, which includes strict adherence to speed limits, results in significant delays for office workers, with some coastal line services running up to 40 minutes behind schedule. The Locomotive Operating Engineers Union launched the move following the Railway Department's decision to suspend 4 crew members, including the driver and assistant, pending an investigation into the derailment of the Sagarika Express near Pathua. Union President KU Kontha Singh has stated that the industrial action is a direct response to the suspension's 24th warnings that drivers will no longer overlook equipment flaws to maintain the timetable. Officials say the disruptions are likely to continue until the labour dispute is resolved.
Now for some news in brief.
Nearly 300 kilograms of narcotics, including heroin and cannabis, seized by the Police Narcotics Bureau are said to be destroyed today at the Lakhovita incinerator in Manathavelluwa following court orders from Palapitiya and Shilau.
The business news on Gold FM.
Sri Lanka recorded its third highest vehicle import expenditure in history during 2025, according to the central bank. Total spending reached $2.04 billion following the removal of all private vehicle import restrictions in January last year. A significant surge in imports occurred after April 2025 as demand recovered from years of government limitations. The total is surpassed only by record spending levels seen in 2015 and 2018.
International news on Gold FM.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi arrives in Russia for high-level talks with President Vladimir Putin as regional tensions escalate and diplomatic efforts with the United States reached a deadlock. The meeting in St. Petersburg follows a mediation attempt in Pakistan, which faltered after Donald Trump cancelled a scheduled visit by his envoys. The American president signaled a hardening stance on social media, stating that the Iranian leadership must initiate direct contact if they wish to resume negotiations. Economic pressure intensifies as the United States imposes sanctions on major Chinese independent refiners for allegedly purchasing Iranian petroleum. In the Strait of Hormuz, the American naval blockade remains in place, with military officials confirming that 38 ships were turned back or forced to return to port in the latest enforcement actions. In the Levant, the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah faces collapse as both sides exchange fire across southern Lebanon.
Entertainment news on Gold FM.
Nedra Talley-Ross, the final founding member of the legendary 1960s girl group The Ronettes, died at the age of 80. Alongside her cousins Ronnie and Estelle, Ross helped define a signature pop sound that secured the group a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Sports news on Gold FM.
Isipatana College faced St. Anthony's College at Havelock Park, Columbia today in the school rugby league. Isipatana beat St. Anthony's 43-14. Meanwhile, Royal College took on Science College at the Royal College complex. Royal beat their rivals 43-10. And that's all the news for now. Stay tuned to Gold FM for the latest updates. I'm Avinindra Sova for Gold FM News. Have a great day ahead.